Podcast. This is Mike Higman, your host, and you are listening to part 2 of my interview with James Stovall. The last episode was how he was able to kill the largest buck in the history of Florida. It was an awesome story. Public land with a bow. If you have not heard that episode yet, I would go back and listen to it for sure. In this episode, we're going to talk some about his strategies and tactics and scouting and that kind of stuff. So you might have noticed in that last episode, I said this would be out by 4th of July, and I need to be done giving these deadlines because obviously I'm not hitting them. We're about 2 weeks late right now. So I apologize for that. Life has just been getting in the way, but the good news is I just did another interview today with another really good public land hunter where we're going to be discussing scouting and some tactics as well. So make sure to stay subscribed so you know when that one comes out, since I'm not giving you a timeline for that. Just stay subscribed. Just a few other things. I just want to say thanks to everybody that's left a review, even if it wasn't since the last episode. I was recently had to set some things up with the podcast again and went back and read some of the reviews on iTunes, and I really appreciate the people that took the time to write a review, said some really cool things that were really encouraging, and definitely helps me want to keep doing this podcast. And to those that are just leaving a star review, that's great too. That really helps out with the rankings. So I'm sure if you listen to podcasts, you hear everyone asking for all the time. So thanks again for that. I want to give you a quick update on the Pith Purge ozone generator that I talked to you about last time. I had a few people reach out to me and say they had a hard time finding it. For those of you that were able to find and order one, thank you so much. I had to make some updates with the listing, and actually right now the listing is not even on Amazon. So hold tight if you're looking for one of those. There's just an issue with regulations in Amazon, basically. So I may or may not be selling them on Amazon by the time we talk again. But if not, I'll have an alternate way to buy them. Stay tuned for that. So let's just go ahead and get in this episode and hear what James has to say about scouting. Let's start with your overall scouting strategy when you're hitting a new property today. So, we talked about what you did with your record buck, but how have things changed? What's your scouting tactics today when hunt a new piece of public land?
Okay, so I use an app on my phone called Tracks. I'm sure there's many other different apps that you can use, but the one that I use is My Tracks. And so I pull that up when I'm scouting a new area, and I can look on there. It's a Google Earth basically, and you can pick out pinch points, funnels, bottlenecks, islands out in the swamp, dark green spots. You can pick out and see where you want to scout what looks interesting. Edges, to me, edges work out really well. So I always have my Tracks app up, and it's basically following me with a red line everywhere I go on my app. Then if I find pertinent sign, big track, scrape, big rub, find a rub line, I can drop a pin at the spot that I'm at, name it, and then at the end of my scouting trip, then it paints a picture. It's like putting pieces of the puzzle together. So when I go back, I run another track and look around further in that area, and it helps me zero in on certain areas. Well, now I've got a backpack full of cameras. I run, I want to say 38 cameras I have that are operational.
That's a constantly changing number.
Yes, because no matter what brand of camera, and I run, the Moultries, the Spy Points, Wild Game, Walmart cheap Tascos, which are great little cameras for the money.
Yeah.
Primos, no matter what camera I've used over the years, all of them have pretty much failed at one point or another.
Yeah.
After a couple of years, something happens with them. If I get 4 years out of a camera, I consider myself fortunate.
Do you normally
find
a deal and buy them in batches? Usually I end up with 3 or 4 of the same because of that, or you pick one at a time?
I'll find them like at Walmart, say after the season,
Yep.
when they start marking their stuff down.
Yep.
I'll pick up a few there. Through the year, I might go on Amazon and throw one in the cart, here and there. And just through the years, accumulated cameras.
Uh-huh.
And like I said, I've got a bunch of different manufacturers. The Spy Point, I entered the world of cell cameras last year.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, those are highly addicted. So awesome. Having the ability to have cell cameras send you the photos where you don't have to go back into an area and contaminate it, disturb it, has been, very instrumental to my success last year.
And now they got that $40 unit you can connect to any camera, just about.
Yes, the Spy Point. Yeah,
I haven't tried.
I don't own one of those. I haven't either, but yeah. So the technology is there, but I enjoy running my camera trot lines, I call them, and have a little plastic carrier of a bunch of SD cards, and I run them, change out the card, freshen up the scrapes. So that's how, when I'm scouting, I look for, depending on the time of year, the scrapes may be fresh, they may be old scrapes from previous years, old rub lines, whatever. But I look for scrapes, and when I find a scrape, if it's not worked, so I scrape it out, apply my Black Widow, and turn the camera on. And that's.
Do you use a stick to scrape it out, or your boot?
I do not use my boot.
Okay.
Like I said earlier, I try not to use any, even though I spray my boots down, I don't want that. Yeah. There's just too much risk there.
Yep.
So just about 99% of the time, I try to find a stick in the general area. If not, I will use my machete, but I walk back out of the way and I spray the tip of my machete down with Scentaway, and then I may mist the tip of it with the Black Widow,
okay,
the XXX, and then I'll go over there, then I'll scrape, and I make my scrapes bigger than life to make them noticeable.
Okay.
And I scrape out all the leaves, sticks, down to bare dirt underneath the licking branch, paying special attention not to brush up against the licking branch.
Okay. And
then apply the scent, turn the camera on, and go continue on scouting. And what I found is the bucks, these scrapes, they're the same annual scrapes every year,
right?
So to speak. The bucks they're active every year.
Do you ever make a scrape like from scratch? Like there's not an existing one there, so you make a licking branch as well?
Absolutely. Scrapes are a huge part of my tactics.
Okay.
Probably more than any other, besides finding acorns.
Okay.
Scrapes make up a huge part of my hunting tactic. So I have found very good success making a mock scrape. I always carry twine, little rope, small diameter rope in my backpack, and I've had very good success creating a mock scrape. So one particular management area that I like to hunt has a bunch of magnolias.
Okay.
And, the big glassy looking leaves, dark green leaves. And so those are really good at creating licking branches. If the limbs are a little high, then I will tie onto a limb, pull it down, and then tie that rope around the base of the tree, and bringing a licking branch down, basically creating a licking branch. And I've done that on oak trees. Say you have a scrub oak and it has just a solid canopy of limbs around the perimeter, the drip line, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So deer, what I've seemed to notice is deer are drawn to that solo licking branch hanging out there in the middle of nowhere. it's a licking branch hanging down. It might be a vine hanging down, but they're just drawn to it. And that's one way deer communicate, is by the licking branches. Deer will utilize those year round, depositing forehead, preorbital gland, licking it, chewing on the limbs, does and bucks. So if, say, an oak tree has just a solid wall of limbs hanging over, I will clip a bunch of limbs off and leave one solitary limb hanging out. And then I'll paw it out, make a mock scrape. And if deer necessarily don't come to it and hit it that year, then by the following year, deer take that over, and now it's an annual scrape.
Yeah, that's really
so that's one thing I've done.
So what type of year do you normally make these, like during the summer, or how long before a hunt are you scouting that area?
Well, one particular, when I was younger, I used to scout all summer. I'm not gonna lie, I don't do that anymore. So around August, the end of August, I try to start going in this one particular area here in South Florida that I hunt. I just do the same thing every year. It's really nothing changes as far as my tactics there. I go out mid to late August, go to my scrapes. I open them up while they're possibly using the licking branches. The scrapes themselves on the ground are full of leaves and debris, sticks, leaves. So I will paw those out down to bare dirt using preferably a stick, and then doctor them up. Branch butter is preorbital and forehead gland. Those are the
Black
two.
Widow as well?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's kind of like a wet honey, like a runny honey consistency.
Okay.
And it's really potent. So I'll apply a little bit of that to the licking branches over the scrape, and then I'll apply either dominant buck or scrape master, which is dominant buck and doe and estrus. I will apply that even in August. And my cameras that I run on the scrapes, I prefer to run those on video mode. Not all of them, but I prefer to run them on video mode. That gives me the deer's reaction when they come up and smell it, and how they interact with the scent, how they react to it. And I have honestly never had a negative reaction to the Black Widow. And they just come in. You could tell when they approach it, they're like sniffing. They get closer, sniffing the licking branch, sniffing the ground. And then once they get up there to the licking branch, then they just do their thing, and they just take it over and start using it. And that's how I get my buck inventory every year.
Now, do you hunt over scrapes as well, or is this your inventory?
No, I love hunting over scrapes, and my favorite spots, my most successful spots, favorite stands, if you will, favorite trees, those usually have acorns and active scrapes within bow range of the stand.
Okay. So your
The
ideal
acorn.
Go ahead.
The acorns, it might be a bumper crop one year, and then the following 2 years, it may not drop a single acorn. And then the next year, it's like another bumper crop of acorns.
Yeah. And
I call them football acorns. I don't really know my acorns, but they're the oblong kind of.
Swamp chestnut is what I would call it. Are they those? No, that's not it. Swamp chestnuts are the giant ones.
Yeah, these are like football shaped, and they're like, some of them are dark brown and tan, or green and tan.
Maybe
they're two-tone. Yeah, maybe a live oak. So if I can find, the live oaks dropping in direct correlation with the fresh scrapes, that's what I key in on. And what I've learned over the years is, while I'm scouting, the area that I hunt, there's a bunch of cabbage palms.
Huh?
And then you have these big live oaks, cabbage palms, palmettos. So you can stop and listen, like later on in
Yeah.
the year when they start dropping, and you can hear them hitting the cabbage palms, and it's just a distinct sound. So once you know what it is, you're like, that's an acorn hitting a cabbage palm.
Yep.
And so I've gone to the sounds multiple times and found live oaks dropping, and in turn have harvested deer off of that same tree.
So you're out scouting, and let's say you're headed through some palmettos or cabbage palms, and you find a live oak tree, and it's somewhere new. You immediately start setting up a scrape at that location, and then set up a camera.
Not necessarily. I always try to carry binoculars. So if it's leading up to the season, then I can use my binoculars and look up in the canopy of the tree, and I can tell if it's loaded or not. If it's loaded and they're just not dropping yet, I will mark that on my tracks and then revisit that, or I may put up a camera depending on how many I have left, or in my head, I know I've got half a dozen more scrapes to get to. But I don't make mock scrapes everywhere, just certain spots.
Do you try to stay out of an area before you're going to hunt it? Do you try to let it rest for a number of days, or do you try to check your cameras right away?
I try to, but the urge to see what's on those cards leading up to a hunt usually takes over.
Yeah.
So I try to, if I know I've got a couple, one or two good target bucks, it doesn't do me any good to go in there 3 or 4 days before a hunt. I already know he's there.
Right.
So I'm doing more harm than good at that point. But I have gone in there, checked the camera, had a good buck on camera, like on scout day, the day before the hunt, and then turned around, went back in there and killed that buck the next morning.
I mean, that's something I battle, especially a new area. There, on one hand, I know it's better to stay out of the area and not like you mentioned with your hunt. I think I read it in the article. I don't know that you said it this time, but basically you knew you were upset when those deer saw you or smelled you because you knew they had not been pressured at all, and you kind of But you went back in there 5 days later and shot the buck because that's where he was. So had you not scouted there, you never would have been there in the first place.
Right. Now, something else to consider is when I killed him, the day I killed him, when they came out of that thicket, they didn't come back by me. The closest they got was probably 100 yards.
Yeah.
And going by. Now, by them seeing me the week before, could that have, put some kind of doubt or caution in their head, even though they probably walked through that morning, before daylight? The bucks that walked under me, or the deer that walked under me, very likely was those 4.
Right.
But I try not to educate the deer just the least that I can, and keep them as natural and feeling comfortable as possible, especially the older class deer, because when you get to 4-year-olds plus, they just act totally different.
This is off track real quick. That's something I forgot to ask you when we talked. When you got down from the stand, is that something that you had done before, like had success climbing down from the stand and hunting on the ground, like, stalking up, or was like just like a Hail Mary? That
was pretty much a Hail Mary. Yeah. But knowing that the fire break crossing was a couple of 100 yards up there, and observing that smaller 8-pointer, he came out and he was like making a direct beeline to that crossing.
Right.
In that direction. And to me, it was obvious that's where he was going.
Yeah.
And then my buck was still walking around, kind of grooming himself, reaching back. He would lay his head back, scratch his back with one of his drop tines, doing his thing over there. But he kept looking over in the direction that 8-pointer went.
Right.
So then he was milling around, and then he just kind of twitched his tail and started slowly walking that direction. And then when he went behind this little scrub oak or oak limb or whatever it was, I'm like, he's heading to the crossing.
Yeah.
So I had previously not done that. It was just seemed like the right thing to do. So I needed to get down and get around in front of him because I kind of knew I had a good idea where he was headed, and that's where he was headed.
If the results are indication, then it seems like it was the right decision to make. You know, you might have sat up in the stand and watched him walk out of your life had you just sat there. So
yeah, and like maybe not have gotten another opportunity.
So going back to the scouting, we covered that. So ideally, you're finding a scrape under like a dropping oak tree. Does bedding go into consideration at all for when you're looking for an area to hunt?
No, because this is just my opinion, but the Florida woods are so thick, they can bed anywhere. Could be a bedding area, you know, compared to the Midwest or Georgia. In Georgia where I hunt, there's 5 years post clear cut pines. They're 10 foot tall, choked with briars. That's the bedding area. You know, the Midwest, there's certain bedding areas, and then there's, they travel back and forth to feed. In Florida, what I've noticed is deer can bed anywhere. You know, there's thick palmettos everywhere. And so I really don't take, never been asked that, but I really don't take into account where they're bedding. I just look for the sign and then run my cameras, try to get the inventory, as much intel as I can, and then I go in and hunt specific deer.
Yeah.
And try to be scent free.
So this podcast is focused on the South mostly. And of course, part of that's from Florida, where I'm from. And so I don't know when, a few years after I started hunting, I found the Hunting Beast and Dan Infalt, which like really heavy to like locating buck bedding and focusing on that. And I spent years really doing that. And I still try to keep bedding in what I've found to be in Florida myself is exactly what you're saying. They're all these typical bedding points that you would be looking. To me, there's just too much available. It's not scarce enough in Florida. And I've been to the Midwest in the fall and the winter, and you can see these bedding points because it's the best spot you can see. But it's even having moved up to Georgia, it's different where you have leaf drop. But where James is from, it's thick and green all year round. There's no leaf. Mm-hmm. You can see a little better in December, January, but the palm trees are always the gallberries are, a lot of the trees, they don't drop their leaves. So it's kind of, and I have found that there's some WMAs I've been to in Florida where I could find and related to maybe water or some other, I don't think there's like a hard and fast rule. I'm sure there have been people that have successfully killed Florida by locating bedding. I think it's really hard to do on a consistent basis on that.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not real up or put too much emphasis on finding bedding areas.
Well, I would be more apt to listen to you over what I tried doing for a few years. So.
Well, well, I don't claim to know it all. I just know what's worked for me,
Sure.
And what I do.
I've actually, I kind of changed my opinion on just talking. I think the Florida stuff is applicable to anybody in the Southeast, but it'll different in that it's, to me, the most successful hunters that I've talked to are people that know an area really well and have specific spots that they know are like guts, and they will spend a lot of time in the woods hunting those specific, as opposed to, I think in general, a better strategy is to have a lot of different spots and only hunt them once. And that maybe that still is a better strategy, but in my experience, a lot of these really successful guys are hunting to hunt the same spot multiple times because the deer are not bedding in the same place every night, and they might only go through an area once a week. So I think first hunt's always your best hunt.
Yeah, first time in.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's your thought on that? So that's kind of like my overall thought process. But what's your thought on if, let's say you pull a 3-day quota hunt and you find it like a dynamite spot that's dropping, there's a good scrape and it's dropping acorn. Willing to hunt that spot a couple days in a row if or
Yes.
are you going to find something new?
Well, so if I find a target buck and he's, number one hit lister,
Yeah.
when I go in there, I will look, now we have the technology where we can see this 10-day forecast, 7-day, 5-day forecast, and know what the wind is going to be for the most part. Even though in Florida, the wind seems to always swirl and change every 20 minutes sometimes. But for the most part, I try to get a predominant wind direction, what the wind's going to be, and I will pick out a couple of trees for, a southwest wind versus a east northwest wind, and visually have that in my head. So if the wind shifts, then I can take my climber. Most of the time I hunt, I guess that would be true. Most of the time I hunt out of a lock on. It's, it's up, it's set, it's quiet entry and exit. There's not that scraping up and down the tree, on a climber, even though I try to be quiet when I climb. But my favorite is probably lock-ons. And so when I'm scouting, say one particular area, one scouting trip, I might hit 2 areas that might be a half mile apart. And then the next scouting trip, I might hit, 1 or 2 other areas. And so when it's said and done, starting in mid to late August, by the end of September, when the hunts actually start, I will have cameras running in sometimes 6 different areas. So I will take that intel from those cameras, and then I'll know sometimes I only have 1 buck that's huntable, that's worth hunting in my eyes. And I will go in there and I'll spend all 4 days in 1 tree if I can. Or if that wind is just dead wrong out of that lock on, then I'll take my climber in there and I'll sit 50 yards away in my climber, or 30 yards away in my climber, and get on the backside of the feeding tree or the scrape or wherever I'm hunting. But I've spent all 4 days in the same tree before, and end up killing a buck on like the last morning. I very rarely hunt the last afternoon, although I have with success, but typically, you just hunt day 1, 2, 3 and the last morning, and then you pack up and head home.
Yeah.
Typically.
Do you, just for Florida listeners, when you apply for quota hunts, are you just try to stick with some areas close to you, or do you basically go for like the best hunts there are, kind of build up your, and like,
yes,
you'll try? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. I don't just, as much as I enjoy hunting, I don't just go hit a management area because it's close just to get out there.
Yeah.
Married 24 years, 2 kids, full-time job. So there's life happens, so, so it works out for me where I have certain hunts, 4-day hunts planned, or as far as regular quota. So you have 5 choices on the regular quotas. I don't fill out all 5 selections.
Right.
I'll just put 1 or 2 hunts, the ones I want.
You'll take.
So if
point.
I don't get them, you're right, I'm building up those preference points. And then besides that, then I probably put 95% of my time and attention into special opportunities. So to be honest, I kind of rarely hunt the regular quotas anymore.
When they first did that hunt, I'm trying to remember back the way it used to be. Was it you could buy as many applications as you, and it was just a lottery?
I think so. Now I believe that it's $495 cutoff, so you can spend $495 in application fees.
Oh,
per
you still
hunt.
can do that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So,
but I don't know
like $5
how
a
they
spot, right? Yeah.
Right. And I know people that they spend a boatload of money. They cap out their.
Yeah.
They've got to cap out their
on
their
like 3 or 4
applications.
hunts. Yeah.
Yeah, because they get drawn almost every year. But the one good thing about the special opportunity hunts, those permits are still transferable.
Yes.
So even though you don't get drawn in your name, you still have the opportunity to go out there and hunt those, because those permits are transferable, whereas the regular quotas, they're not.
Yeah. Which speaks to the value of those hunts, if them putting the $500 than trying to buy one.
Yes, yeah, because there's no guarantee that
be
you're
given
gonna
one,
find one.
not buy one, of course.
Right.
But so that was something I was curious about, is if being right there, if you hunt regular green swamp very much, and it sounds like, based on what you just said, probably not.
No. I've got some really close friends that go in there and hunt it and do well.
Yeah.
But it's overcrowded. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, and that's the one thing. This episode is going to be published too late to really help anybody this year. Future years, it's one thing I learned after 1 year is don't waste your spots. Like, if there's 1,000 spots or 500 spots or whatever, put that in. You could get that in your redraw if you half try at it. So
yes,
save your points up and get them if it's 3 or 4 or 5 points. And if
or
you time
7.
it right, you can get a muzzleloader hunt 1 year and a general gun 1 year and an archery 1 year. Every year you can have a good spot to hunt. It's funny. I just moved to Georgia this year. Which one thing I was smart about Georgia, their quota hunt system, you don't need to even buy a license, and it won't be too late when this comes out. So you can apply for the Georgia hunts, and you can just apply for a point. And I was just checking yesterday, and some of their best hunts will take like 5 or 6 to get. But you don't have to buy a license or anything. You just every year got to remember to put in. And whenever you do decide to hunt Georgia, then you can get one of the best hunts there are.
Interesting.
A little piece of advice there for. And I was looking at the numbers from last year. I want to say there was only 2,000 and 3,000 people that applied just for a point. Maybe there's some like people that hunt those, giving secrets away. But
it's secrets.
Yeah.
And that's statewide, right? That's numbers.
Yeah.
Are
So
statewide.
I just moved here. I've never even hunted in Florida or in Georgia before. But now this year I've already got 2 points built, because the last couple of years starting to think ahead with it. So the reason I mentioned this is I just put in for my Florida points. I don't even know where. I have no particular intention of coming back down to hunting the spot, but I had bought a lifetime license, so I need to buy the license every year. Anyway,
that's cool.
I'll be coming back at some point when I get enough points or something. So, I want to cover a few more things with Scout. Do you still have some time for me?
Sure.
We're way over our hour we talked about, so
that's okay.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about persimmons. Do you spend any time looking for persimmons, or are you mostly looking for oaks? What other foods to look for?
I've come across some persimmons a few times and have harvested does off of them.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge draw, the persimmons, for deer, but I don't come across them that often. And what I found is when I know where certain persimmons are, and they don't produce, in my opinion, what I've seen is they don't produce fruit, or some years it's abundant. The leaves, the limbs are just hanging by the weight of the persimmons. But then again, the hogs just devour them. The hogs just come in there and just seems like everyone that hits the ground is gobbled up by a hog for the most percentage.
So,
but
when you go to a new area and you're scouting, do you have points marked on your map where you're to first, or how do you decide where to start your scouting at? If this is a new area.
Yes. So I always try to go on Google Maps, Google Earth, and I'm on there quite a bit, looking ahead of time and trying to pick areas of importance that I want to put boots on the ground on. That cuts a lot of dead scouting time down. So I try to look at points on Google Earth that are of interest to me to go into and look. And then on Google, I guess it's Google Earth, Google Maps on my computer, when I go in with my tracks on my phone and I plug all those little pins, information, scrapes, rubs, big tracks, an active trail. When I drop those pins on my app, then I'll come back and I transfer those pins to my Google Earth. on my computer. And then after several scouting trips or years of hunting an area, then after years, it just becomes, you sit the same trees because of the scrapes.
Yeah, you're running your scrape lines to, put your cameras out, and then you're finding the deer, and then you sit the stands are good. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'll transfer the pins onto my Google map, and after numerous scouting trips, it's like a puzzle materializes. You just keep adding pieces of the puzzle, and I'll use like red pins for scrapes, yellow pins for rubs, a different shade of pin for maybe an active trail, like a well-used trail, tracks going both directions. Like, yeah, there's a lot of game coming through here, a lot of deer. So after you accumulate so many pins on your map, then it just becomes pretty obvious where I need to spend my time.
Yep.
So
just kind of going back to the new area idea, as far as terrain features, what do you key on? Because it sounds to me like this is my assumption based on what you're saying, is basically you're finding a transition line, some type, and you are going to follow that line. You start finding scrapes and productive oaks likely, which I guess maybe isn't in the later season. You probably kind of lose that ability. You're going to try to find some area with like good sign. It could be rubs too. It sounds like rubs or scrapes and oak tree. Am I right in that assumption?
Yes, I like edges. Whether it's a hard palmetto edge, the edge of a flag pond, edge of a cypress swamp, water edge where the water overfloods the swamp and comes up and meets the hardwood edge. An edge could be of various different things.
That was my next question. Like, what is there an edge you like the most? If an area has several, let's say the area has it's got a creek running through it. There's a couple swamp bottoms, and there's also a couple generations of pine trees. So those areas could meet up in different ways. Is there any like combination that you prefer necessarily?
I would say not necessarily. I try to pick those out on the Google Maps and then go in and put boots on the ground. And while I'm walking, my snail trail on my tracks is running. Then I'm able to drop pins. And I like between, like, say, a palmetto flat or standing pines, or it might be an oak flat, gawberries, whatever, scattered pines, say between two bayheads or two swamps. And if you look on Google Maps, you can see where those little pinch points are. And then depending on what feature it is, deer will choose the path of shortest distance to go from, say, swamp to the other swamp. If there's a little outcropping or a point of a cypress head or a swamp, and it's only 50 yards across the scattered pines and palmettos to the other swamp, I found that deer are more likely to cross there than out across the wide open flat. Even though they will cross there, they're more likely to cross at those narrower spots. And then it's just a point of getting time, boots on the ground, time out there, walking around those little pinches and squeezes, looking for tracks, trails, sign, and just plugging it all in, if you will, and coming up with the best game plan.
How likely are you to be hunting like within 20 yards of water, typically?
Likely, very likely. Yeah. Sometimes I'm in water. Just depending on where I'm at, but most of the time I'm in very close proximity to water. So I'm not going to give out any names, any names of management areas, but you can tell it's swamp, and then it's dark green area on the map, on the Google Maps, and you get out there, put the time in, scout, walk out there on those dark green islands, basically is what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And those are cabbage palms, big live oaks, scattered magnolias. And here's another, depending on where you're hunting, type of terrain, what I found is deer in whatever area they're in, they like to rub certain trees, meaning soft bark trees, cypress trees, magnolia trees over oak trees, the harder bark. I found some tremendous rubs on oak trees with, the hard bark, and typically those are your bigger bucks.
Yeah.
But
I can think of, we're not thinking of the same area, but I can think of exactly what you're talking about. So hopefully a lot of other people can. And these areas, like what I'm thinking of is you're almost walking through mud if it's dry enough, because you might be walking through 6 inches of water or something and just hitting these islands. But it's all, where I'm thinking of, it's all tree canopy. It's a different kind of tree.
Yes. And a lot of times sometimes the water goes in your boots walking out to these islands.
Yes.
And then once you get up there, that's usually high and dry. And then when I'm walking around, everything kind of looks the same out there on this one area that I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But while I'm walking around, I'm looking for acorns, either on the ground or in the canopy. Mm-hmm. I'm looking around, always scanning. If I see a magnolia tree off in a distance, I would say 75% of the time when I go over there, there is a scrape underneath that magnolia. So the limbs are hanging over at the perfect height, say chest high. And most of the time, if there's a lone magnolia over there, sitting over there, I go over there, and for whatever reason, deer like to scrape underneath the magnolia branches. So I found also, not a lot, but sometimes there'll be a scrape there, and then there will be a rub on that tree, the same tree.
Yeah.
And so I just look for stuff like that. It's, it's not rocket science by any means. I kind of just go with it every year and try and pretty much do the same things every year now. Although I do, tend to learn something new every year. By no means do I know it all, but, I just kind of go with what's worked in the past and continue that, and try to do everything I can to, my belief is the harder you prepare, the luckier you are when it comes time to hunt.
Yeah.
You prepare, you try to set the table as much as you can, and then those 4-day hunts on those specials come and go quick.
Right.
So you pretty much have to have some target bucks in mind to go out there and get it done in those 4 days, 3.5 days.
So I got a couple questions, and we'll just wrap it up. You might have just answered this question, but I'm curious if you could describe like your ideal spot. And you can change some details if, we're not looking to get anything away here, but if maybe a spot that is like gonna produce, like the first day of the hunt, like this is, I found it. What does that spot have or look like?
Buck sign, scrapes, fresh scrapes, big rubs in close proximity with a food source, like dropping live oaks. Mm-hmm. That would be probably my number one thing I get excited about, is if there's big rubs, active scrapes. I know what bucks are using that scrape by use of the cameras, and there's a food source dropping there or within 30, 40 yards of there. The food source is bringing in the does as well as the bucks, but the does are coming in there, frequenting through there. So that gets me the most excited, is finding good buck sign and in close proximity or right there with the food source. And I will hunt the foods. I will position myself closer to the food source than the scrape. if given a choice.
Right.
I will hunt
Yeah, if you can't, if
on,
it's not the same tree. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I will lean towards the food source. And then, you know, in years past, scenarios past, I've been hunting a food source, and I'll hear the buck working the licking branch on the magnolia.
Mm-hmm.
You can hear that branch and the leaves just working, going back and forth. And I'll turn around and look over there, and there's the buck working the licking branch, just tearing the branch up with his horns. And then go to paw, step back, go to paw the ground. I'll give him a couple of grunts, jerk his head up, turn, and walk right to me. I've done that. We haven't covered that, but I like to joke with my buddies and tell them and say that I'm a one-man band, because I am a strong proponent of grunting, rattling, can calling, snort wheezing when giving the chance.
Yeah.
And calling, I've been I've had some really exciting hunts calling.
Are you doing that blind just like every how many minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, at least every 30. So whenever I think about it, 15, 20 minutes, I will give out grunts, a series of grunts, or the can calls, like the Primos, can call, like I guess it's a doe in heat sound.
Does the can call?
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that blind. And one particular buck, he was cutting across a scattered pine, palmetto flatwoods, typical Florida flatwoods, a couple of 100 yards out there. It was my target buck. I saw him. I grunted. I'm looking at him with binoculars. He hears it. He's looking my direction, turns his head, continues on the route that he's walking. I pick up my horns, crack my horns together. He stops. I ease my binoculars up. He's looking intently my direction, loses interest, puts his head down, continues the path that he's walking. Then I let out a snort wheeze where I just close one nostril and just go like this and draw out that last note, if you will.
Yeah.
Got back in my binoculars real slowly. He's standing there looking intently. He turns dark. He puffs up, pins his ears back, starts licking his nose, and from 200 yards out, starts posturing, walking sideways towards me.
Oh, man.
Out in the palmettos. And he ends up 30 yards from my tree, and I kill him.
That's awesome.
So although he heard the grunt, he wasn't interested. He heard the rattle. It didn't interest him. But then the snort wheeze, he just couldn't handle that.
Yeah. So
I have those bag of tricks, and I try to utilize them all. And the snort wheeze, I don't particularly do just on a whim.
Yeah.
It's like if you see a buck and you don't have time to get your horns or your call, and you see him just walk through an opening, you can do that real quick. A lot of times he'll lock up and look, and he's either going to come or he's not. But it's not going to hinder things, I don't think. The only thing it would hinder would be a smaller buck.
Yeah.
Because that's more of a dominance call.
Do you just do that stuff pre-rut, or do you just do that the whole season?
All season. Early season, well, like say, for instance, last year, the Georgia opener, it's in September. I think it was around September 12th, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the woods, and I was hearing bucks. I guess it was one buck, but I was hearing bucks grunting and just very vocal back in the woods and running, a little bit of chasing, and that was in September. So, I think we put sometimes too much emphasis on pre-rut, rut. I think deer are going to do what they're going to do, and they know those sounds, the grunts. And deer, to me, I look at deer as curious. You give them just enough to be curious.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to overcall or educate them too much, to where they put danger with the calls,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just
sure.
give them just a little bit. And like when I can call, I might 2 or 3 can calls every 20 minutes, because 20 minutes ago, the deer that could probably hear it now was out of earshot 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And they're just walking through. Well, now they're in a spot, an area that maybe they can hear my call. So a couple of grunts in a couple of different directions and sit tight for 15, 20 minutes. And then maybe a grunt and a couple of can calls, or rattling, tickling. Early archery season, I will tickle the horns together. Like they're feeling, it's not an all out battle. It's just a tickling.
Yeah.
And I've had deer come in, curious and looking at the tickling sounds. So I try not to overcall. I just try to give them that curiosity aspect to come on over here and check this out.
You try to hunt like the peak of the rut any differently than other times of year, or still focus on the same stuff?
Pretty much focus on the same stuff. Going back to Georgia, my lease in Georgia.
Yep.
There are there are a lot of ag fields, and there might be strip of trees, a pinch point going from one field to another. I will try to get on those travel areas, where
Right.
a deer is likely going from point A to B, like a travel corridor, and sit up in those travel corridors and spend as much time as I can, preferably all day sits during the pre-rut and rut.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into what my last question for you. What kind of differences are between your techniques or hunting the public land you're hunting in Florida? Do you hunt it differently?
I still put boots on the ground and try to learn. Last year was a learning year. It was my first year on that particular
Okay.
lease in Georgia. To me, not taking away from any Georgia hunters or private land hunters, but to me, the hunting on a Georgia lease is leaps and bounds easier than hunting Florida public.
Yeah.
And my Florida public listeners here will agree.
Yeah.
It is very tough to hunt and be successful over and over again in Florida.
Yeah, and I don't think that's not a knock on like you just got a lease in Georgia. I mean, it's not a knock on anybody hunting those areas. It's just it's not the so it doesn't mean that the guy in Florida is necessarily a better hunter. He's hunting a harder to place, hunting a harder to hunt area.
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean that, or
I don't think you did. I was just making sure we were clear on that. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Not that Florida hunters or myself by any means are better hunters than Georgia. It's just when you like the Midwest or Georgia, because Georgia has a lot of ag fields where I hunt, and it's not all one canopy like here. You're able to pick out transition areas, pinch points, a little easier in there, and you don't have as much ground to cover. You get in the timber down in the bottoms, you walk around, and plus the deer numbers it's ridiculous how many deer are on our lease compared to Florida. Mm-hmm. Here you might sit all year and see 6 or 8 deer. Up there, if you don't see 4 to 6 deer sitting, it's odd.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're seeing double digits every sit, depending on where you're sitting. So there's a lot more deer. There's better deer in general, and typically cooler temperatures, more comfortable, and it's just a more enjoyable time. So,
and I guess you were already sticking higher standards on yourself with bow hunting. Something I've talked about on this podcast for a long time is setting your standards for. So, I mean, I think there's a reason that bow hunting is real in the Midwest. One, because there's a lot better pinch points, and you can. But two, they're looking for an additional challenge, which they're getting. So that goes back to where you're located doesn't make you the better. Set
No.
whatever limitations you want. I think there's a reason that gun hunting bigger in the South because the deer are more spread out. It's tougher. So that's part of your story that's kind of amazing to me. Not only was it buck that was shot in Florida, but it was.
And I'm not against gun hunting. Now, muzzle loading, I still do it all. I just enjoy bow hunting.
Sure.
If I had to pick, I'm going to bow hunt, but I'll still carry that rifle with me. I'm not against that.
I'm not like a diehard hunter. I'm a bow. I haven't had the success level where I feel like I need myself, but I did have access to a big private piece of property that was owned by. And that season was actually to me. I felt like this was with my rifle. I shot what I think bucks on the property, and I unfortunately lost access to it after that the next year. But had I stayed, I probably would have started limiting myself to this. So that just kind of goes back. We all have our own standards and limitations, and
yes,
it sounds like you've got the same perspective as it's.
Yes.
It's not who's better
for
than
each
who.
his own. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Yep.
Well, man, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I got 2 episodes out of this, so I asked you for an hour, and I got 2. So I really appreciate your time. I think people are with this, and also, I guess I got to ask you one last thing. Is there any like single or couple like last advice that you'd give to hunters in general, and that you found are critical in your success?
Don't wear your hunting boots while driving, and always be mindful of your scent and trying to be as scent free as possible, and put as much time in prepping beforehand as you possibly can. And then as the hunts get closer, the days get closer, try to avoid going into those areas. Do your work in the summer. You're trimming trails, you're clearing shooting lanes in the summer, and then letting that all settle down.
I guess that's one thing I did miss. Are you pre-prepping stands?
Yes, I'll when I can pre-hang my stands. Look, go and I'll take a extended pole saw and try to trim as much as I can beforehand. I can't always do that, and it has bitten me. Man, if I'd have just trimmed that limb right there, that was my shooting opportunity. Yeah. So I try to do as much as I can beforehand and setting the table as best I can.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think you've given us a ton. Can't thank you enough again. And good luck this season. I guess you're getting the drawings in now, so who knows what's going to look like this fall yet. But I can tell you just talking about some of these scenarios got my heart pumping a little bit.
I'm excited as well. And if anybody has any questions, I'm kind of an open book. Look me up on Facebook or, the Instagram. I'm kind of new to the Instagram. I'm not real tech savvy, but, shoot me up if you have any questions or, about anything really. Scent, hunting, just any kind of hunting questions. I don't claim to know it all, but I'm more than willing to help out.
Cool. Yeah, I found you. Just messaged you on Facebook. I seriously looked for you probably, off and on. I don't know where I was looking. I can't remember. When I started the podcast, I talked to you, and one day you were on my friend list. I just sent a message to you, and it was that easy. Yeah. But I'll have to give you a follow on Instagram too. It sounds like I do like the instant messaging system. Give James a follow. What was that? It was Simple James 15.
13. Simple 13. James 13.
Simple James 13, and I'll put a link in. So
okay.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks a lot, James. I'll maybe check with you sometime during the season, see how things are going.
All right. Sounds good, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
Good luck to everybody.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that one as much as I did. Thanks to James for coming on. It was really exciting to get to talk to him. Just it was, one conversation for me, but to hear about how he was able to kill that buck and then get into some of these tactics, he's definitely got me excited for the season coming up, and I'm ready to get out and do some scouting. I just did another interview today, so make sure you're subscribed, like I said before, so whenever that does drop, that you'll get it sent to your whatever you listen to podcasts on. And if you got any question or anything, you can shoot me an email at downsouthhunt@gmail.com. And with that, we're out. Down South.